Firewatch Tower 16 stood alone in the black pine forest, miles from the nearest town. No roads, no neighbors, just endless, whispering trees. It was exactly what I wanted. 6 months of isolation, peace, and quiet. No distractions, just the job. 6 months to clear my head, to get away from everything. Out here there was no noise, no people, just the solitude I needed. Ellis had worked this tower for 8 years, 6 months on and 6 months off, before me. A tall, quiet man who looked like he hadn't had a full night's sleep in a long time. When I arrived to relieve him, he was already packed up, his truck idling at the base of the tower. "Everything you need is in the log book," he said, rubbing a hand over his face. Then, as if debating something, he reached into his bag and pulled out a worn leather journal. "And you'll want to read this." "What is it?" I asked. "Something you should know." He hesitated. Then, in a voice low and careful, he said, "Follow the rules, even if you think they're stupid." And with that, he drove away. The first day was uneventful. I unpacked my things and settled in. After I made dinner, I could have sworn I heard a pack of wolves howling. A nice touch to end the day. I woke with the sunrise, drank bitter coffee, and watched the forest stretch for miles in every direction. I scanned for smoke and listened to the static hum of the radio. On the second night, out of boredom, I opened Ellis's journal. It wasn't a Firewatch log. He wrote, "I found them after a storm, small, helpless things. Thought they were bear cubs at first, until one stood up on 2 legs and tried to follow me home. I almost left them, almost turned my back, but they were so little, shaking, and I knew they wouldn't survive the night." I closed the book, wasn't in the mood for Ellis's short stories. After dinner, I scraped the leftover scraps off my plate over the edge of the tower and fell asleep listening to the radio. The next day, I found the prints. They were in the clearing beneath the tower, deep enough in the dirt that whatever made them had to be heavy. At first, I thought they were bear tracks, but they were wrong. Too long, too narrow. The shape was almost human. My stomach twisted as I measured one with my boot. It was twice the size of my own foot. I forced myself to laugh it off. Maybe a trick of the soil. Maybe I was seeing patterns where there were none. Still, when I returned to the tower, I locked the door and read more of the journal. "They don't turn human, not like the stories. They walk like us, think like us, but they aren't us. They're wolves through and through. But they know when I leave and they know when I come back. They wait for me. I raised them here, taught them the rules for when I'm not around. They know to stay away when other rangers are here. I think they love me in their way." They grew fast, too fast. Their eyes changed first, sharper, brighter. They still played like pups, but their games were rougher, more precise. They knew how to chase, how to surround me in the clearing without thinking about it. By the time they were a year old, I knew. I'd raised something that shouldn't exist, but I couldn't let them go. They had adopted me into the pack. I was their elder. I kept them safe and secret. I closed the journal, heart pounding. "This wasn't just some madman's ramblings," I said out loud. I found the list of rules scribbled in the back. Number 1, never leave the door open. Number 2, never throw food scraps off the tower. It attracts them. Number 3, if you hear footsteps coming up the tower, yell, "No!" Number 4, don't step onto the catwalk at night no matter what. Number 5, if you continuously have problems related to the rules, leave raw meat and one of your shirts on the big rock by the clearing. They will leave you alone after that. I don't know what I had gotten myself into here. That night I heard it, scratching on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, claws scraping against the wooden steps. I froze. The air inside the tower felt thick, heavy, like something was watching me through the walls. Then, a second step. the sound of weight shifting on the stairs. I remembered the rule. If you hear scratching footsteps coming up the tower, yell, "No!" I forced my throat to work, my voice hoarse and shaking. "No!" I shouted. Silence. Then, a slow retreat. The footsteps faded, disappearing into the night. I stayed awake until dawn. A week later, I found the deer carcass. It was near the fire road, half buried under pine needles. I could tell right away that it wasn't a normal kill. Its rib cage was crushed inward, ripped apart like a toy. Its throat was missing. I'd seen wolf kills before. Bears, mountain lions. This wasn't that. It looked deliberate, like something had torn it apart, but left most of it untouched, saving it for later. I followed the rules to a T after that. I don't know what was out there, but I didn't want to find out. That evening before dark, I left 2 large chunks of meat and one of my shirts on the big rock. As I was walking back to the tower, I heard movement in the brush behind me. I didn't wait to see what it was. I just ran to the tower and up the stairs 2 at a time. I locked the doors and climbed into bed. I had no problems after that. The months passed by pretty quick, and before I knew it, I only had 2 days left on my watch. Then I got the call. It was my supervisor informing me of something terrible. "Ellis is dead," he stated. "Hit by a drunk driver on his way back. Killed instantly." He let the news sink in for a minute. I didn't know Ellis that well, only met him that one time at changeover. After a long silence on the phone, he asked me if I was able to stay on for another month, until they could find a replacement for him. I'd get time and a half for the entire extra month, so I agreed. As I ate dinner that night, I thought about Ellis, how he was doing this job for so long, and then bam, end of the story. When I got up the next morning, I reset my timer from 1 day to 31 days. "At least it's time and a half," I muttered to myself. I stood out on the catwalk that evening watching the sunset. Before I knew it, it was 9 at night, and the moon and stars shone bright. That's when I saw them. The forest was still. Then, movement. At first, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight. But then my eyes adjusted. Figures, watching. They weren't wolves. They weren't men. They were something else entirely. Tall, lean shapes, standing just at the edge of the tree line. Their eyes caught the moonlight, glowing silver blue in the dark. I felt something cold settle in my gut. One of them took a step forward and stood up, easily, effortlessly, and I knew. They were waiting for someone. My heart sank. That's when I remembered. Ellis was gone, but whatever secret he had out in the woods was still here, and they were expecting him. I remembered the passage in his journal, "But they know when I leave, and they know when I come back. They wait for me." Panic set in as I backed into the tower. What will they do when they can't find Ellis but find me instead? A few minutes pass and I hear an almost playful yip, then another, and then what I could only explain as barking, coming from multiple sources. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. Loud and fast up the stairs. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "No!" The footsteps slowed but didn't stop. I quickly locked the door and drew the curtains. I didn't want to see what was coming. Again I shouted, "No!" But the steps reached the catwalk, and I could hear claws scraping the windows, then a pounding on the door, not enough to get through, just enough to scare the crap out of me. Then came the growling. They knew Ellis should be here, and not me. They pounded the door a few more times before heading back down the stairs. I sat there all night, too scared to sleep, too scared to even blink. By the next morning, I finally got up the nerve to stand up and peek out the window. They were still there at the base of the tower. My heart pounding, I suddenly remembered Rule 5. I grabbed some of the meat I had left and wrapped it in my shirt. I opened the door and took a deep breath as I walked onto the catwalk. There was 4 of them, standing in the clearing. Their fur rippled in the wind, muscles shifting beneath thick coats. They scented the air, ears twitching. Their eyes flickered to me, searching, waiting. I realized, with a sinking feeling, what they were looking for. They looked up at me, and one of them snarled at me as if in a disapproving tone. I motioned to them I was going to throw down my shirt, and it landed next to them. They used their claws to rip it open in one swipe, and they all devoured the meat inside. Then they all stood there looking up at me. I slowly came down the stairs and came to a stop about 10 feet away from them when I reached the bottom. Ellis had written that they were smart, so I hoped they would understand what I was going to tell them. I know you didn't expect me here, but Ellis is dead. He was killed in an accident on his way back up here, I stammered. They looked at each other with sadness in their eyes. I forced myself to speak. Ellis isn't coming back. But he left me his journal, explaining how he found you and raised you. I can help you the way he used to, if you want. For a long time, they didn't move. Then finally, the biggest one, the one I recognized from Ellis's journal as the leader, lifted his head and howled. A long, mournful sound that sent shivers through my bones. The others joined in, howling for their lost packmate. Then they turned and ran into the woods. For a week, their cries filled the valley. Then one morning as I came outside, I saw something. At the base of the tower, neatly placed in a line, were 4 bones. Clean, white, and my old shirt torn and shredded. I understood. I was one of theirs now. Then, on the 9th night, they returned. Not at the edge of the tree line this time, closer. Right at the base of the tower, looking up at me. Waiting. And I don't know why I did it, but I went down to them. At first they circled me, sniffing, testing. Then one nudged my arm, lightly at first, then playfully. Another shoved its massive head beneath my hand, expectant. I laughed. And just like that, we were playing. We ran through the clearing, darting between trees. I shoved at them, and they leapt back, tails flicking, fangs flashing. Not in aggression, but in something that almost felt like joy. I tackled one, its thick fur warm beneath my hands. Another yipped and darted past, claws kicking up dirt. I chased after them, laughing as they circled me, dodging and feinting, like we'd been doing this for years. It's crazy to think, I realized. I'm playing with this pack of werewolves like they're a couple of dogs in my backyard. Then, one of them got a little too rough. A sharp claw raked down my forearm as we tumbled through the dirt. It wasn't deep, barely more than a scratch, but my skin burned where it touched. They all froze. The leader, the biggest one, stepped forward. He lowered his muzzle and sniffed the wound, and something cold and hot at the same time flooded through my veins. I stumbled back, heart pounding, vision blurring for just a second. The leader huffed, almost like a chuckle. The pack turned and disappeared into the trees. I stood there for a long time, wondering what was going to happen. Visions flashed in my mind of me changing into one of them. The full moon was only a few days away. I didn't see the pack again until that night. The first change was agony, bones shifting, muscles stretching, mind splitting apart and reforming in ways a human brain isn't supposed to. I don't remember much of that first night, just the sound of my own howling and the scent of pine and blood on the wind. When I woke up, I was on the forest floor. I wasn't alone. The pack surrounded me, watching, waiting, and I wasn't afraid. That morning, I called my supervisor. "Tough situation up here," I said, voice raw from a night of howling. "I'll stick around for the next 6 months, make sure things run smooth." He sounded relieved. "That's a hell of a favor, but I won't say no. You sure?" I looked at the leader, the way he watched me like I was one of them now. "Yeah," I said, "I'm sure." I needed a pack, and the pack needed a ranger to keep them secret. A few months later, when the new guy arrives, the truck pulled up at the base of the tower, and I watched from the catwalk as the new guy stepped out. He looked young, nervous, just like I had. I climbed down to meet him, extending my hand. He hesitated, then shook it. "You're relieving me," I said. "Everything you need is in the logbook." Then I pulled my own leather journal from my pocket. Worn, used. "And you'll want to read this." His brow furrowed. "What is it?" I clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Something you should know." I watched him, debating whether to say more. Then, in a low, careful voice, I added, "Follow the rules, even if you think they're stupid." And with that, I left. The new rules, scrawled in the back of the journal. The wolves are not wolves. If you see them in the day, do not acknowledge them. If you hear howling, stay inside and lock the door. 3. Do not, under any circumstances, go into the forest on the full moon, no matter what you hear. Do not throw any table scraps off the catwalk, it attracts them. If you continuously have problems related to the rules, leave raw meat and one of your shirts on the big rock by the clearing. They will leave you alone after that. As I began to drive away, I yelled to him, "Don't be surprised if you see me again around the full moon. I have a few friends that come through here around that time." Hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, please hit the like or subscribe button, or even leave a comment.